Hello, my name is Jonas. This is the first part in a series called How I Approach Lenses. In this video, I will be talking about sensor size, I explain how to calculate the crop factor of a camera, and why that's important when choosing lenses in regards to field of view and depth of field. So, when talking about crop factor, the reference always seems to be the 35mm full-frame photography sensor. This might be to the video DSLR revolution started by the Canon 5D Mark II camera and its video recording capabilities about 10 years ago. On this image, the 35mm full-frame sensor is represented by the red area. Next, in the blue, is the Super 35mm sensor used, for example, in the Canon C100 Mark II, which I'm shooting on right now. Inside of that, in the green area, are the 4/3 sensor of the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K. Lastly, the white area represents the two smallest sensors, which I will be talking about in this video. The 1-inch sensor of the Canon XC10 and the Super 16mm sensor of the Blackmagic Micro Cinema Camera. Now, the Canon XC10 actually has a bigger sensor, and with an aspect ratio of 4:3, it's a bit taller and it's also a bit wider. But when it's used in video mode, it's basically the same size as the Super 16mm sensor of the Micro Cinema Camera. And because this discussion of crop factor is context dependent, I also removed the top and bottom of the full frame sensor, because that one is a photography sensor with an aspect ratio of 3:2, and when used in video mode, the aspect ratio is 16:9, so you don't utilize the top and bottom of the sensor. And the Pocket Cinema Camera 4K also has a different aspect ratio than 16:9. It's actually a bit wider, since it's follow a DCI cinema standard. So when it's used in UHD 4K 16:9, it crops off a bit from the sides of the sensor. So after deciding which aspect ratio you want to calculate the crop factor in, which context you want to be in, you simply take the width of the reference sensor, in this case 36mm of the full frame sensor, and divide that by the width of the sensor you want to compare that to. In this case, we can take the Pocket 4K sensor, which has a width of 18.96mm. 36mm divided by 18.96mm results in a crop factor of roughly 1.9. Now, as I said, this is using the whole width of the Pocket 4K sensor. And if we would like to fill up a whole 16:9 screen, top to bottom, with this camera, we will have to crop off a bit from the sides of the sensor, which then results in a different aspect ratio. So, to know the aspect ratio in 16:9 mode on the Pocket 4K, we need to recalculate the width of the sensor. And this is done by taking the whole width, 18.96, and dividing it by the whole resolution, which is 4096 pixels. And then multiplying that by the resolution used in 16:9 mode, which is 3840 in UHD 4K. So we end up with a width of 17.775mm, which is used by the Pocket 4K sensor in that UHD 4K 16:9 aspect ratio mode. And dividing 36 by 17.775 gives us an aspect ratio of roughly 2. Now, the Super 35mm sensor of the C100 Mark II and the Super 16mm sensor of the Micro Cinema Camera already are in a 16:9 context by design, so they won't have to be recalculated for this purpose. And also, if we would like to know the crop factor when using a narrower aspect ratio, for example 235, 2.40, 2.39 or something like that, you don't have to recalculate the width of the sensor, since the whole width is used in that mode. Now, when it comes to lenses, knowing the crop factor of a camera becomes useful in regards to two parameters. Firstly, how a focal length of a lens is represented, or the field of view, and also the depth of field, which you get, or the bokeh. And as an example, we can take a full frame camera, for example the 5D Mark II with a 50mm lens at f4. If we would want to match the C100 Mark II to that one, we would need a roughly 35mm lens at f2.8 to get the same field of view and depth of field. And to calculate this, you simply take, again, the width of the reference sensor and divide that by the width of the sensor you want to compare to. So 36 in this case millimeters divided by 24.6 of the C100 Mark II results in a crop factor of 1.46 times. If you divide the 50mm lens of the 5D Mark II by the crop factor of 1.46, you get almost 35 millimeters. And if you divide the aperture of f4 by the crop factor of 1.46, you get an aperture of f2.8. So this gives me a useful way to know how an image will look with certain types of lenses on different cameras. Now, because of this, the smaller the sensor size is, the longer the depth of field tends to be. And of course this can be controlled using the iris by opening it up more, but you will reach some limits there as well. And this has also been my experience with the Canon XC10 and Blackmagic Micro Cinema camera. The depth of field tends to be longer, and also the other way around on the 5D Mark II. It's very easy to get a very shallow depth of field and a lot of bokeh. And I found from my experience that I really like to work with the Super 35mm size on the C100 Mark II, for example, because it gives me a lot of control and flexibility on how I want the image to look. For example, if I want a shallower depth of field, I just add some ND filters and open up the lens. And of course, if you are in a controlled environment, you can control those factors with all of these cameras and sensor sizes. But if you're shooting docs or events and you don't have that amount of control and it's starting to get a bit dark, for example, and you're opening up the lenses, you will get a shallow depth of field very quickly with this 35mm full frame sensor. And the other way around, if it's very bright and you don't have enough ND filters or something on the smaller sensors, you will get a very long depth of field. Also, in regards to the smaller sensor sizes, I've had some bad experience, for example with the Canon XC10 and the 1-inch sensor on that one. It had some really bad ghosting artifacts going on. And I think it's due to the internal noise reduction of the camera, because smaller sensor sizes tend to be quite bad in low light, and to deal with the noise, the camera applied internal noise reduction, which then ended up being some kind of ghosting artifacts. And this sometimes made the images unusable. The same on the Blackmagic Micro Cinema camera. It had some problems with a fixed pattern noise, a vertical fixed pattern noise with lines that was really hard or almost impossible to remove in post. But I don't think that was due to the size of the sensor, and I believe other Blackmagic cameras have had this problem as well. But I haven't seen it on the Pocket 4K yet, so I hope that that one will be good from those problems. So I hope you learned something from this video. In the next one, I will talk more about focal length and also compression. If you have any thoughts or questions, please leave a comment below. Also, remember to like and subscribe for more videos. Thanks for watching. Until next time, goodbye.